The vast, infinite expanse of space stretches endlessly, a deep, haunting silence hanging in the air. Stars flicker like distant flames, ancient and knowing, their light reaching across the boundless void. As the camera sweeps through this cosmic sea, countless galaxies come into view, each teeming with life. Alien civilizations, thriving in their own unique ways, inhabit distant planets, each one carrying its own story, its own history of rise and fall, of triumph and devastation. Yet, among these countless stories, one legend stands apart. It is a tale whispered in darkened chambers, a myth passed through the ages, dismissed by those who believed it was nothing more than a warning, a fleeting shadow of a forgotten time. This is the story of Terra. The humans, a species once believed to be nothing more than a ghost in the galaxy's history, a myth erased by time and enemies alike. But the truth is far more powerful, far more mysterious than anyone could have imagined. The Terrans are not gone, they are returning. And this time, they will remind the galaxy of the true meaning of vengeance. Across the vast expanse of the galaxy, where stars burn like cold fire in the endless dark, there exist civilizations whose grandeur can only be matched by their arrogance. These beings, with their sleek ships and gleaming fleets, rule over countless systems, their technologies so advanced that they have come to view the cosmos as their domain, their playground. Their ships, like graceful creatures of the void, glide effortlessly through the stars, their forms adorned with intricate designs that represent their might and elegance. Each ship is a masterpiece, a reflection of their empire's superiority. But beneath the shining exteriors of these alien civilizations, there lies an unspoken tension. For deep in the archives of their history, there is a name whispered in the corridors of power, a name that stirs the hearts of the bravest leaders with unease. That name is humanity. Long ago, long before these empires came to dominate the galaxy, humanity had once been a force unlike any the universe had ever known. Their reach was vast, their ambition limitless. They were pioneers, explorers, conquerors, and creators, each of their worlds a testament to their incredible resilience and drive. The galaxy was their home, their domain, but somewhere along the way, they vanished. And as time passed, their legend turned into a myth, their history erased, their very existence scrubbed from the records of the galaxy's most powerful species. For centuries, the mighty empires of the galaxy reveled in their dominance, dismissing the tale of humanity as nothing more than a ghost story told by the weak. The humans are no more, they said. Their civilization fell to dust, lost in an apocalyptic war? Some whispered that they had destroyed themselves in a final, cataclysmic battle, their own technology turned against them, erasing them from the fabric of the universe. Others claimed that they had fled to the furthest reaches of space, retreating into the darkness, far beyond the reach of any known empire. And so, humanity faded, becoming little more than a cautionary tale, a warning of unchecked ambition. But what if they never truly left? The question hung in the air like a shadow, unsettling and haunting. The galaxy's leaders, so sure of their power and control, had erased all traces of humanity, believing them to be a threat that had long since been extinguished. They had torn down their cities, shattered their monuments, and forgotten their history. But what if the humans had been watching all along, waiting for the perfect moment to return? For ages, this question had been buried deep in the minds of those who had once feared humanity's wrath. Now, it began to stir, rising like a storm on the horizon. The empires, in their arrogance, had dismissed the humans as a myth, a relic of a bygone age. Yet, what if the myth was real? What if the humans were not gone, but simply biding their time, hidden in the far reaches of the galaxy, gathering their strength for the day when they would return? The galaxy had forgotten the humans, but the humans had not forgotten the galaxy. And as the ancient empires basked in their false sense of security, A new chapter was about to be written in the stars. A chapter that would remind the galaxy of what it had long since dismissed the terrible power of a people who had been erased from history, only to rise once more. The legend of humanity was about to become reality. And this time, it would not be ignored. In the distant reaches of the galaxy, the dominion of Xylan reigned supreme, a vast empire that stretched across hundreds of star systems. Their rule was absolute, unchallenged for millennia. Xylan's fleet was the stuff of legend, mighty dreadnoughts, their surfaces gleaming with the polished shine of supremacy. These ships, enormous and powerful, cut through the stars like predators stalking their prey. With every movement, they left a trail of fear behind them, their technology centuries ahead of anything their rivals could muster. The Valkyr, the flagship of the Xylan fleet, was the crown jewel of their armada, a massive, imposing vessel that exuded an aura of invincibility. Its dark hull was carved with intricate symbols, each telling the story of its countless victories. It was a ship that had been built to conquer, to destroy, and to leave nothing in its wake but the ashes of those who dared defy the Dominion. But now, the Valkyr cruised through the infinite blackness of space, its engines purring with a calm, almost menacing hum. A routine patrol, the fleet assumed, a simple mission to maintain their grip on the galaxy. But something was different. Something had disturbed the stillness of their endless control. An anomaly, a signal unlike any other, had been detected at the outer edges of their territory. At first, it seemed insignificant, another stray pulse from a distant star, perhaps. But the signal persisted, growing stronger, more defined. The Dominion's advanced sensors could not ignore it. Admiral Zurich stood at the helm of the Valkyr, his sharp eyes scanning the data that flooded his command center. His face, hard and proud, betrayed no sign of uncertainty, but deep down, he felt a stern, unfamiliar unease. The signal was strange. Human-made? The very thought seemed absurd. He waved his hand dismissively, trying to shake off the unsettling sensation creeping into his mind. "It's impossible," he muttered, his voice thick with disdain. "The Terrans? A myth. We've erased their records. They are long gone, obliterated in some forgotten war." His words echoed with authority, the absolute certainty of a leader who had never known defeat. "This is nothing but pirates, or perhaps some relic of a past long buried. Prepare for extermination." But despite his arrogance, the unease lingered. He ordered a scout vessel, a small and nimble ship, to investigate further. The report came back with alarming speed. The strange signal was originating from several unidentified ships, their designs crude, aged, battered yet undeniably purposeful. The fleet scanned them further. The ships were human-made. Zurich's mind raced. This wasn't possible. The humans had been wiped from the galaxy's memory for so long. How could they be here? And why now? His thoughts were cut short as his officers began to speak in hushed tones, each one processing the impossible reality unfolding before them. Yet, even as doubt began to creep in, Zurich refused to believe the truth that was slowly revealing itself. These ships, despite their age, were moving with remarkable efficiency. Their movements were precise, almost calculated, and they were closing in fast. The Dominion's arrogance, built on centuries of unchallenged rule, was beginning to falter. Zurich's grip tightened around the armrests of his command chair, his face flushing with irritation and fear. How could this be happening? The Terrans were supposed to be gone, lost to the winds of time. With a sharp command, he ordered the fleet to fire upon the approaching vessels, confident that their crude designs would crumble before the power of Xylan's mighty ships. The weapons of the Valkyr roared to life, launching streams of devastating firepower into the darkness of space. The crude ships should have been obliterated with ease. But the unexpected happened. The human ships didn't crumble. They moved like wraiths, weaving through the incoming fire with an eerie precision, dodging blasts that should have torn them apart. And when the first blast hit, it was the Dominion that felt the tremor. One of their dreadnoughts, the pride of their fleet, shuddered, its shields cracking under the force of a barrage from the human ships. A second shot pierced through its hull, causing the ship to explode in a brilliant flash of light. The entire fleet froze. The sound of the destruction echoed across the command center, the realization dawning slowly. The human fleet was old, yes. Their technology was primitive by Dominion standards. Yet, somehow, their ships fought back with an uncanny precision, an intelligence that was beyond mere accident. Admiral Zurich stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. The arrogance that had once defined him was now slipping away, replaced by a creeping dread. He had dismissed the humans as a myth. Now, in the face of their unexpected resistance, he understood the true weight of his mistake. The Dominion's ships began to engage in a battle they had never expected. The humans fought with a ferocity, a brutality, and an instinctual cunning that sent a chill through Zurich's very bones. These were not the weak, fading remnants of a forgotten species. They were something far worse. The tide of battle was turning. And this time, it was the Dominion that would feel the sting of defeat. The stillness of space was shattered by the roar of battle. The vast fleet of the Dominion, once an unstoppable force, now surged forward in a full-scale assault on the approaching human ships. The Valkyr, the flagship of the Xylan fleet, led the charge, its massive cannons firing with relentless fury. The Dominion's weapons, precise and powerful, should have torn apart the ragged human ships in an instant. The Terrans, after all, were a mere shadow of what they once were: ancient, forgotten, a myth. But the humans had not forgotten how to fight. The human fleet, though old and battered, moved with a deadly grace. The ships, once thought to be relics of a lost era, now seemed to glide through the stars with a life of their own, as if they were more than just machines. They were predators, silent and swift, weaving between streams of fire with an ease that defied their crude technology. The Dominion's weapons, no matter how advanced, seemed to fall short against the Terrans' uncanny ability to dodge and retaliate with ruthless efficiency. The Dominion fleet unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, bright streaks lighting up the dark expanse of space. Yet, to their surprise, none of the human ships fell. Not a single one. The Terrans twisted and turned, evading the attacks with an elegance that seemed almost unnatural, as if their ships were guided by instinct, by something deeper than mere technology. The Dominion fired again, more concentrated, aiming to wipe out the fleet in one swift blow. But the humans were ready. Their ships, despite their age, fired back with devastating precision. Kinetic slugs tore through the air, their impact sending shockwaves through the Xylan ships. One by one, the once proud dreadnoughts of the Dominion were crippled, their shields failing under the relentless assault. Explosions erupted across the battlefield, lighting up the darkness in brilliant flashes of orange and red. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and the echo of shattering steel. The Xylan fleet, for all its might, was crumbling before the unexpected power of the human ships. The Valkyr fired again, its massive guns sending a shockwave of energy toward the closest human vessel. But the Terrans were no longer where they had been. With a sudden burst of speed, the human ships slipped away, weaving in and out of the Xylan fleet, like shadows in the night. The Dominion's weapons collided with empty space, their blasts missing their targets by mere inches. A Dominion dreadnought, a symbol of Xylan's power, was struck by a barrage of ancient missiles that shouldn't have had the strength to penetrate the Dominion's advanced shields. Yet, against all odds, the missile pierced the ship's core, sending it spiraling into a fiery explosion that consumed everything in its path. The shock waves of the blast rippled outward, tearing apart nearby ships in a chain reaction. The scene unfolded in chaos. The once organized and imposing Dominion fleet was now a disarray of twisted metal and fire. Ships broke apart under the relentless onslaught of the Terran fleet. A massive warship, a prized symbol of the Dominion's might, was torn apart in a single, devastating strike. Its shattered remains floated, a grim reminder of the arrogance that had once defined the Dominion. And through it all, the Terrans fought with the cunning of a people who had nothing to lose. Their tactics were unlike anything the Dominion had encountered. They fought with brutal precision, targeting weak points, exploiting gaps in the enemy's defenses. They didn't waste time on grand gestures or honor-bound duels. They fought to win, to survive, to make sure that no one would ever forget what had been done to them. In less than an hour, the impossible had happened. The Terran fleet, with their ships old and worn, had torn through the might of the Dominion's war machines. The once proud Dominion fleet was shattered, its most powerful ships lying in ruins, consumed by fire and debris. The Xylan fleet, which had once seemed invincible, was now nothing more than a crumbling remnant of its former glory. The humans hadn't lost a single ship. The Terrans had returned. The legend, once thought to be a myth, had come to life in a blaze of destruction. And now, the galaxy knew the truth. The Terrans were not just a tale told to scare the weak. They were real. They were here. And they were not to be underestimated. The once proud Dominion Command Center, a massive and imposing structure, now felt suffocatingly small. The walls, lined with screens and glowing consoles, flickered with unsettling images of the shattered remnants of their fleet. Each display told the same story. The human ships, once dismissed as mere myth, were cutting through their forces with terrifying efficiency. Admiral Zarek stood at the center of the room, his fists clenched at his sides, his gaze fixed on the battlefield. His face, usually a mask of stoic arrogance, had turned pale, drained of all color. His sharp, calculating mind was racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. How could this be happening? How could a fleet of outdated human ships, once believed to be nothing more than an ancient memory, be causing so much destruction? A cold sweat trickled down the back of his neck as he watched the chaos unfold. The battle was far from over, but it felt as though the very essence of his empire was slipping through his fingers. The Dominion was built on power, unquestionable, unassailable power. Yet now, before his very eyes, that power was being dismantled by forces he could not comprehend. Reinforcements, Zarek muttered under his breath. He slammed his fist against the control panel, the force causing a loud, sharp sound that echoed through the room. His eyes burned with frustration, a spark of desperation igniting within him. Send in more ships. We'll overwhelm them. We'll crush them beneath the weight of our fleet. He gave the order, his voice cold, but his hands trembled as he issued the command. His mind knew what had to be done, yet his gut told him something was horribly wrong. The Terrans were not like any enemy they had faced before. There was no honor in their battle, no sense of restraint. They didn't fight for conquest or glory. They fought with a primal fury, as though each blow was a personal vendetta. As the reinforcements began to move into position, Admiral Tanakh, his most trusted officer, stood beside him. Tanakh's usually unshakable confidence had crumbled, his eyes wide with disbelief as he processed the unfolding disaster. They were supposed to be myths. Tanakh's voice was barely above a whisper, tinged with panic. He shook his head, as though the words didn't even make sense to him. How are they winning? How are they still standing? Zarek turned to him, his face grim. Tanakh's words echoed in his mind, but the answer was elusive, slipping through his fingers like sand. They weren't supposed to be real. The humans, if they had even existed, were long gone, their history erased from the galaxy's memory. They had been a warning, nothing more. But the humans were here, and they were fighting with a ferocity that shattered everything the Dominion had ever believed. The Terrans did not follow the same rules of war. There was no honor in their strikes, no mercy in their hearts. They fought not as conquerors but as avengers. Their weapons, though old, were devastating. Their tactics were ruthless, unrelenting. They did not negotiate. They did not ask for terms. They came to settle an ancient score, one that had been buried for centuries. And now, as the Dominion scrambled to respond, the humans' relentless assault continued without pause. The war had become a nightmare for the Xylan High Command. They had never faced anything like this. There was no strategy that could contain it, no fleet that could stop it. The humans were not fighting for victory, they were fighting for something deeper, something far more terrifying. They were fighting for justice. Zurich's mind reeled, but he could not find the words. The weight of the truth was pressing down on him, suffocating him. There was no way to turn the tide. There was no way to win. They are shadows, Zurich muttered, barely hearing his own voice. Shadows of something ancient, something we can never understand. Tanak's face tightened, his jaw clenched in disbelief. They are not just shadows, Zurich. They are ghosts. Ghosts that have come back to haunt us. As the Xylan fleet continued to falter, the terror spread like wildfire. The once invincible empire, the rulers of 1,000 worlds, were now facing their own collapse. And the worst part was that the Dominion was helpless to stop it. The humans fought with a fury that came not from ambition or conquest but from the ashes of a long-forgotten past, a history erased by those who thought themselves above them. The Dominion, in its arrogance, had underestimated the Terrans, thinking that the passage of time would make them weak. But it had done the opposite. The humans had been waiting, watching, and now they had returned to exact a reckoning. In the dark silence of the command center, Zurich knew this was not just a battle for survival. It was a war for redemption. And the humans would not stop until every last debt had been paid. The battle had raged for weeks, but now it was over. The capital of the Xylan Dominion, once the heart of their vast empire, lay in ruins. The once pristine cityscape, filled with towering spires and grand monuments to their power, was now nothing more than a smoldering wasteland. Smoke billowed from the wreckage, casting an eerie pall over the shattered remains of the city. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal, the sharp tang of destruction lingering in every breath. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the Terran forces as they advanced, their steps deliberate, unwavering. The Xylan soldiers, who had once stood proud and strong in the face of any enemy, now scattered in fear. Their advanced armor, once a symbol of invincibility, was now nothing more than scrap, their weapons useless against the relentless advance of the humans. The streets, once filled with the bustling life of a powerful empire, were now silent, save for the echoes of the footsteps of those who had come to finish what had been started long ago. At the heart of the ruined city, amidst the ashes of the Dominion's once great capital, stood Terran Commander Kale. His armor was battered, scarred from the relentless fighting, but his expression was calm, almost serene. His eyes, once filled with the fire of battle, now held only a quiet resolve. The battle was over, and the reckoning had come. Behind him, the fallen bodies of Admiral Zurich and the high-ranking officers of the Dominion lay in the dirt, their once proud forms reduced to mere shadows of their former glory. The Xylan had fought with all the might they could muster, but it was never enough. They had underestimated humanity, dismissed them as a myth. Now, the truth stood before them in the form of Kale, a living embodiment of everything the Dominion had sought to erase. As Kale stepped forward, the remnants of the Dominion's capital seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, the flag of the Xylan Dominion fluttered weakly in the wind, but it was already losing its strength, its fabric torn by the violence of the conflict. With a single, commanding gesture, Kale reached out and pulled the flag down. The sight of the once mighty banner falling was a symbol of the end to centuries of rule, to the bloodshed, to the lies. Kale stood tall as he raised the Terran flag, the colors vibrant and alive against the backdrop of ruin. It was a simple flag, a symbol of the humans' return, and now, it fluttered in the air, high above the destruction. The wind carried it with a sense of finality, as if the galaxy itself had sighed in release from the tyranny that had ruled for so long. With the flag in hand, Kale's voice rang out, firm and resolute, carrying across the battlefield and into the ears of every surviving Xylan soldier, every corner of the galaxy that still clung to the Dominion's fading power. "The Dominion is no more," he said, his voice calm but filled with the weight of truth. "You erased us, hunted us, and tried to forget us. But we remembered. Now the galaxy is free, and the war is over." His words hung in the air like a heavy silence, reverberating through the ruins of a once great empire. The Terrans had not come to conquer, nor to rule. They had come to reclaim what was stolen from them, to settle the debts of a past long buried. And now, with the fall of the Dominion, the galaxy stood on the precipice of a new age, one where the echoes of humanity's past were no longer whispers, but a loud, unyielding cry of justice. The winds picked up, sweeping through the remains of the Xylan capital, carrying the remnants of the Dominion's arrogance with it. As the Terran flag fluttered high above the ruins, the galaxy itself seemed to breathe again, the stars shining brighter in the wake of humanity's victory. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was free. The Dominion, which had once stood as an indomitable force, was no more. And with its fall, the true legacy of the Terrans was reborn. They had fought not for power, but for retribution, for justice. They had returned, and now, the universe would remember their name. The war was over, and the galaxy was forever changed. In the heart of the Xylan Dominion, deep beneath the layers of fortified structures and hidden away from prying eyes, stood a chamber that had remained sealed for centuries. It was a place lost to time, a place where even the most trusted of the Dominion's commanders dared not venture. But now, Supreme Commander Zarek, desperate for answers, stood before the ancient doors of this forbidden room. The air in the chamber was thick, heavy with the weight of secrets long buried. The walls, lined with dark stone and intricate carvings, seemed to pulse with a quiet, almost imperceptible energy, as if they were alive, guarding the truth within. The faint glow of dimly lit panels flickered overhead, casting long shadows that stretched across the cold floor. Zarek's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped inside, the eerie silence pressing against him, making every breath feel like a declaration of war. Before him, in the center of the room, was an ancient data console, its design archaic, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs, its surface marked by the ravages of time. It had been untouched for so long, its secrets forgotten, hidden away by the very beings who had sought to erase them. Zarek's hands trembled as he approached, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He activated the console with a sharp command, and the room came alive with a soft hum, the screens flickering to life one by one. For a long moment, nothing appeared. Then, slowly, the images began to form, fragments of history, distorted and damaged by the passage of time. But even in their fragmented state, the truth was undeniable. Zarek's eyes widened as he saw the records of humanity, the Terrans, not as the myths they had been led to believe, but as they truly were. The Terrans had not vanished into the abyss of history. They had been hunted down, wiped out in a genocidal purge carried out by the ancestors of the Xylan. The Dominion had committed atrocities so horrific, so vast, that they had made sure to erase every trace of the humans' existence. Entire worlds had been destroyed, their people slaughtered, their cities reduced to ashes. And for what? Power? Fear? The realization struck Zarek like a physical blow. The humans hadn't simply disappeared, they had been murdered. Erased from the galaxy's memory to ensure that no one would ever remember them, to ensure that no one would ever rise to challenge the Dominion again. As the truth settled in, a cold chill spread through Zarek's bones. The images on the screen shifted, showing scenes of destruction, cities burning, and the screams of those who had been annihilated. The humans had fought back, but they had been overwhelmed, their very existence wiped from history as if they had never been. Zarek's breath caught in his throat. He stumbled back from the console, his mind spinning with disbelief and horror. The truth was too much to bear. How had they forgotten? How had they allowed this to happen? The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing tighter, the truth suffocating him. The once proud Dominion, the empire that had ruled with an iron fist, had committed a crime so great that even its leaders could not bear to remember it. The humans had not been defeated, they had been erased, wiped out in the most brutal and unrelenting way possible. And now, Zarek understood. The Terrans were not here to reclaim what was lost. They were here for something much more personal. They were here for retribution. His voice, thick with the weight of his realization, trembled as he spoke to the empty room, the echo of his words bouncing off the cold stone walls. They didn't vanish, they were erased, Zarek said, his voice barely a whisper, as though the very words were too heavy to carry. And now, they've returned for retribution. A wave of dread washed over him. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, for their place in the galaxy, they were fighting for justice. They were fighting to pay back a debt long overdue. Zarek's mind reeled as the full magnitude of the situation sank in. The Dominion had not only underestimated the Terrans, they had created them, forged them into a force of vengeance. And now that force was here, not to negotiate, not to conquer, but to exact a reckoning that would shake the galaxy to its core. Zarek stood in the room, the ancient records flashing before his eyes, the weight of his ancestors' sins crushing him. The Dominion's reign had come at a cost that had been hidden, buried, and forgotten. But the Terrans had not forgotten. And now, they were coming for what was theirs. The truth was clear. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the moment hanging over the battlefield like a storm ready to break. The Xylan fleet, battered and on the brink of collapse, had one last weapon at their disposal, the Omega-class warships. These were the final guardians of their empire, their trump cards. Massive and powerful, they were designed to annihilate anything in their path. There was no weapon in the galaxy that could stand against them, or so the Xylan believed. But now, in the cold vastness of space, the Omega-class warships launched forward, their colossal forms cutting through the darkness with the roar of their engines. These ships, forged to be the ultimate expression of the Dominion's power, were now the last hope for the Xylan Empire. Their weapons were terrifying energy blasts capable of obliterating entire fleets, shields that could withstand the most brutal assaults. They were invincible. Or so it seemed. The Terran ships, ancient and weathered as they were, didn't retreat. They didn't falter. Instead, they moved with an eerie calm, their movements almost effortless as they weaved through the enemy's fire. The Xylan's weapons lashed out, bright streaks of plasma that should have shredded the human ships to pieces. But the Terrans moved like rays, slipping through the fire with a grace that defied logic. Each strike, each maneuver, seemed driven by something deeper, something that went beyond mere technology. The Xylan fired again, their Omega-class warships unleashing a torrent of devastating energy. but the Terran ships dodged and countered with terrifying precision. Old kinetic projectiles tore through the dark space, hitting their marks with deadly accuracy. A massive explosion lit up the void as one of the Omega ships faltered under the barge. Its shields flickered, and then it crumpled, the sheer force of the Terran attack overwhelming its defenses. The ship shattered into a brilliant burst of flames, sending debris scattering across the battlefield. For a moment, there was silence. The Xylan fleet, once so sure of its dominance, stood in stunned disbelief. But the Terrans were far from finished. The humans pressed forward, their ships cutting through the remnants of the Xylan defenses with an unstoppable fury. They didn't give the Xylan time to regroup, time to think. Every movement was deliberate, every strike calculated. The Dominion's once proud warships were falling one by one, their power extinguished in an instant by weapons that should have been obsolete. Another Omega-class warship exploded, its massive frame splitting apart in a chain of fiery destruction. The impact sent ripples of shockwaves through the space around it, and yet the Terran ships didn't hesitate. They continued their assault with a brutal efficiency, striking at the very heart of the Xylan fleet. Their ships, old, battered, and seemingly outmatched, moved with the precision of predators hunting their prey. It was a fight they had been preparing for their entire existence. The sound of explosions filled the void as the last of the Xylan's once unshakable fleet crumbled into dust. Their proud ships, symbols of 1,000 years of empire, now lay in ruins, their remains scattered in the dark expanse of space. The Xylan had underestimated their enemies, and now they paid the ultimate price. The battle had raged for hours, but the outcome was clear. The Terrans had not only survived, they had won. The Xylan fleet had been torn apart by the force of humanity's vengeance, their might shattered by the very species they had sought to destroy. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for so long was now a shadow of its former self, reduced to nothing more than a memory. The humans had fought with a brutality born from generations of suffering, from a history written in blood and fire. There were no rules, no mercy. The Terrans fought not for conquest, but for justice, for the reckoning of an empire that had sought to erase them. And in the end, it was not the weapons of the Xylan that triumphed, but the unyielding will of the humans, who had returned from the ashes to claim what was theirs. The Omega-class warships, symbols of the Xylan's pride and power, lay broken in the cold expanse, their fire extinguished, their destruction complete. And as the last remnants of the Xylan fleet drifted into silence, the Terran ships moved on, their mission fulfilled. The war was over. The galaxy, for the first time in centuries, was free. The Xylan capital, once a towering symbol of dominance, lay in ruins. The streets, once paved with the pride of 1,000 victories, were now choked with rubble and ash. The grand spires that had scraped the sky, gleaming with the glory of an ancient empire, were nothing more than twisted skeletons of metal and stone. The once bustling city, the heart of the Dominion, was now a graveyard, silent, broken, and burned by the relentless fury of the Terran forces. The air was thick with the scent of destruction, the bitter tang of burning fuel and charred remains filling the atmosphere. The distant echoes of battle still reverberated through the streets, but they were fading, softening, like the last whispers of a dying empire. The sound of crumbling walls and collapsing buildings was a constant reminder that the once proud Dominion was no more. At the center of this desolation, Terran Commander Kale stood, his figure tall and unwavering amid the devastation. His armor, worn and scratched from the long, brutal campaign, reflected the dim light of the dying city. The storm of war still raged around him, but Kale remained still, his eyes focused on the remains of Admiral Zarek and the high-ranking officers of the Dominion who had once ruled with fear and arrogance. Zarek's body lay in the center of the square, along with the shattered forms of his commanders. The once powerful leaders of the Xylan Dominion had been reduced to nothing, their bodies sprawled across the ground like broken puppets whose strings had been severed. They had fought valiantly, but in the end, it had not been enough. The fury of the Terrans had torn through their defenses, ripping apart their empire piece by piece. Kale's gaze lingered on the fallen officers, his face emotionless, but in his eyes, there was a fire, something far deeper than mere anger. It was the fire of justice, of retribution. The Xylan had tried to erase them, tried to bury them in the past, but the humans had remembered. They had returned, not to conquer, but to make the galaxy right again. With a slow, deliberate movement, Kale stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the debris beneath him. The distant rumble of war seemed far away now, as if the very act of the Terran forces standing on the soil of the Xylan capital was enough to silence the chaos. Kale stood before the bodies of Zarek and the other Dominion leaders, his presence a quiet, powerful statement that the war was over. Kale's voice, calm yet firm, rang out across the empty streets, cutting through the silence like a sword through the night. "The Dominion is no more," he declared. His words held no emotion, no triumph. They were simple, factual. The Dominion had fallen, and there was nothing left to say. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The victory was not one of glory. It was not one of conquest. It was simply the end of a chapter that had stretched on for too long, a chapter written in blood and lies. "You erased us, hunted us, and tried to forget us," Kale continued, his voice steady but resolute. "But we remembered. Now the galaxy is free, and the war is over." As his words hung in the air, the Terran forces behind him began to gather, their ships, once battered and broken, now moving across the sky like the reclaiming of their birthright. The flag of the Xylan Dominion, once a symbol of fear and control, now lay crumpled in the dust, its fabric torn by the winds of change. In its place, the Terran flag fluttered in the breeze, simple, but powerful, a symbol of the humans' return and their resolve to never be erased again. The galaxy, long ruled by the Dominion's iron fist, now stood on the brink of a new era. The Xylan had fallen, their empire crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. And in the wake of their destruction, the Terrans stood tall, silent, but unyielding. Kale stood alone in the midst of the ruins, his eyes watching the flag rise higher, the symbol of humanity's victory over an empire that had once thought itself invincible. The war was over. The Terrans had won. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was free. The remnants of the Dominion were nothing but a memory now, their legacy reduced to dust. The Terrans had returned, and with them, they had brought the reckoning that the universe had long forgotten. The Terrans, once thought to be long lost to the depths of history, returned to the galaxy with a vengeance, proving that their strength, cunning, and thirst for justice cannot be erased. For generations, the galaxy had dismissed humanity as a myth, a fable meant to scare the weak. The Xylan Dominion, an ancient and powerful empire, had gone to great lengths to ensure humanity's legacy was buried, hoping to rid the universe of the threat they once posed. Yet, in their efforts to wipe away the Terrans from history, the Xylan unwittingly forged the very weapon that would bring their downfall. Humanity was not just a memory. The Terrans were a force born of pain, loss, and survival. Their return, not as conquerors but as avengers, marked the beginning of a reckoning that the galaxy could not ignore. The Xylan, who had once ruled with unchecked power, now found themselves facing an enemy who fought with a brutal precision that could not be matched. The Terrans were relentless, fueled by the long-forgotten scars of a history erased by the very empire that now trembled before them. With each galactic battle, the Terrans proved their might not through superior weapons or technology, but through the sheer force of will. They moved with a deadly grace, striking with devastating accuracy. Their tactics were unlike anything the Xylan had ever encountered. Where the Xylan relied on honor, strategy, and overwhelming firepower, the Terrans fought with the raw intensity of a people who had been pushed to the brink of extinction. There were no rules, no mercy, only the desire for retribution. The Dominion's arrogance blinded them to the truth until it was too late. The once unstoppable empire crumbled under the weight of their own decisions. The Terrans did not fight for power, nor for control of the galaxy. They fought for something deeper, something more personal. They fought to reclaim what had been taken from them, to settle the debts that had been left unpaid for centuries. In the end, the Terrans proved to the galaxy that they were not a myth, not a forgotten legend. They were a reckoning, a force of nature that could not be ignored. The Xylan Dominion, who had believed themselves to be eternal, was brought to its knees by the very species they had tried to erase. The galaxy would never forget what they had done, and the Terrans had returned not to rule, but to ensure that justice would be served. As the remnants of the Xylan Dominion burn, and the galaxy watches in awe, the Terrans stand victorious. Their ancient ships, once thought to be mere relics of a lost age, have crushed the once impervious empire under their relentless assault. The myth is dead, and in its place stands a new reality, a reality where the Terrans have returned, not to conquer, but to claim what was taken from them. The galaxy now knows, the Terrans are not a memory, not a fable to be forgotten. They are a reckoning. And the story of Terra, the one that was erased and dismissed, has only just begun to unfold. Now, the question remains, what happens next for the galaxy? Will the Terrans rebuild, or is their thirst for justice far from over? The stars whisper their secrets, and the universe watches with bated breath. What do you think will happen next? Leave your thoughts and predictions in the comments below because the Terrans story is far from finished.